Rarely are you afforded the opportunity to literally work with the man who wrote the book. That is the great fortune I find myself having as I kick off this rental owner podcast number 001 and have the great fortune to interview my mentor and my workmate, Mr. Terry Moore, CCIM. Terry wrote the book Building Legacy Wealth, and tonight we're going to have the opportunity to meet Terry, learn more about what makes him one of the best apartment brokers in the industry, learn more about this amazing book that he wrote, and get more information on how we too can build legacy wealth. But before I do that, let me welcome you to this new podcast called Rental Owner Interviews, or ROI, where I will be interviewing, meeting with, getting wisdom from all of the successful investors, suppliers, experts, participants, members of the industry through San Diego County and the Southern California region. My name is Doug Tabor, and I am an apartment building broker. I work with investors who want to build legacy wealth buying and selling apartment buildings and small rental properties in Southern California. You can hear more about me at www.yourapartmentbroker.com. And now on to our guest, Mr. Terry Moore. Terry Moore helps real estate investors make the most important financial choice of their next decade. He's a top apartment broker who has received 9 major recognitions, including Investment Broker of the Year, Deal Maker of the Year, Transaction of the Year, and CCIM of the Year. In January 2018, Terry received the inaugural Commercial Broker of the Year award from the San Diego Association of Realtors. After earning his MBA at Southern Methodist University, Terry worked for the world's largest bank, owned a hardware store, was a shopping center developer, and then became what he calls a hyperactive income property broker. Boy, I know that working with Terry now for a year. Terry has been a commercial broker since 1987. He earned the coveted CCIM, Certified Commercial Investment Member designation, which has been awarded to fewer than 5% of commercial investment members. He has been a member of the National CCIM faculty. Terry's articles have been published in national, state, regional, and local magazines. He summited Kilimanjaro at age 59 and took up triathlons after 60. In his spare time, he is on track to read 50 nonfiction books this year. Terry and his lovely wife Sandy have been married 40 years, have been rental owners for 37 of those 40 years, and have been working in the same business daily for most of their marriage. It gives me great pleasure in this very first podcast, 001, to interview my guest and friend, Mr. Terry Moore. I hope you enjoy it. How you doing, Terry?
It's a great day.
It's a good day?
I'm glad to be here with you. This is a good thing.
I'm happy that you are here. We finally got to line this up. You're busy these days, so it's nice that we got to finally pin you down for this podcast.
Pin down. I'm glad to be of service to our mutual clients and other folks in the industry.
Good. Well, might as well get started. I have a number of questions that I'd like to ask.
Okay.
And in the beginning, my big question, really after observing your work for the last 12 months, it's been 12 months since I've been here.
That's amazing.
At ACI.
I didn't know we were having that much fun. I knew time was passing, but I didn't know it was that much fun. Good.
It's been fun. There's been some challenging transactions through that 12 months, but all in all, it's been fun.
Your class has shown, so that's good.
Thank you.
You were good before you came, and you're even better now, I think.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And that's why I came, so I could get better.
Good.
Which is really kind of the impetus of my big first question. After observing you for 12 months, my big question is, where does the dedication come from?
That's not hard. It's actually a calling.
Really?
Yeah. There's this thing called the Abrahamic Covenant. And you know I'm a man of faith. I'm flawed, deeply flawed.
As we all are.
But my notion is that your gifts and your strengths are only important to the extent that they serve others. When I was young and stupid, I believed stupid things. But now I understand that part of what's prepared me is to help be of service to others. And there was this guy, Abraham, in old days. He was minding his own business, and the creator of the universe appeared to him. And he didn't say, more and more for me and mine. He didn't say, for the people that you care about. He said, all the nations of the world would be blessed. Even the people you call dogs, Gentiles, would be blessed. And the Abrahamic Covenant has the idea that to whom much is given, much is required. And I've spent close to 30 years trying to get good at this. And in a little while, in the fullness of time, I'll just be another old codger at a national park. And I'm not going to be very impressive as an old codger. I'm probably not very impressive now. But temporarily, I can be of service to people. I believe that our team really does help people make better choices than they could on their own. And so now in my silver hair stage, I want to help use whatever I've learned the hard way and help people learn faster and easier and be more efficient. I want giants to stand on my shoulders. I've been given a lot, and I want to be able to give to others.
That's a fascinating answer, especially in the business that we're in. And you know I've struggled with this, and I've come to you with these struggles.
We live in a fallen world, and we're called to a higher standard.
Right.
Some of our competitors think that clients are walking wallets, and their purpose is just to enrich the broker. And you and I think that we're called to a higher standard than that. We think that things matter more than just the number of deals and just the number of dollars. The idea of the book, the legacy notion, is lots of people can get wealthy. But what matters is sometime in the next 100 years, you're going to be dead. I'm going to be dead. What matters is what impacts. It's what people do and what people say and what people think. That's your legacy. Whatever your net worth is, I hope it gets 10 times bigger, maybe 100 times bigger. But more important than how much stuff you leave behind is the impact you had on others. And not everybody in our craft sees it that way.
At what stage of your career, maybe at the beginning, did you align? Let me rephrase that. At what point did you, when you came out of the gate, was the career aligned with your values? People jump into brokerage and they do look at it as transaction pay. But you've handled your career much differently, like you said, than everybody else. Was that from the get-go?
I did a bunch of things wrong. And setting aside my insecurities and flaws, I've tried to be congruent for a long time. In the last few years, I've made a more conscious choice to try to please an audience of one, to try to live a life so that the people I vacation with, the people I worship with, the people I compete with, if I took them to any other arena of my life, they wouldn't be surprised. They would say, that fits. He's weird, but he's consistent in his weirdness. And I don't want people to hang around me because I'm weird, but integrity means without wax. It means what you see on the surface is what you see is what you get. And that's the kind of life that I aspire to. I'm making different mistakes now than I did 10 or 20 years ago, but I'm trying to live in a way that honors God and serves people. Heaven knows I make a lot of mistakes, but that's the aspiration.
Wow. Yeah, that's a good one. Integrity is
it is a good aspiration to live up to. Sometimes it's hard, and it's
Everything that you and I do that's worthwhile is hard.
I read that in your book. Choose your hard. Talk about that a little bit.
So I'm married above my station, and the bride of my youth has, for more than a couple of days, gone to Weight Watchers. And I would periodically say, what's the score? Which meant, were you up an ounce or two, or were you down an ounce or two? And the other question was, what was the talk? Because in Weight Watchers, they understand that if you eat more than you burn off, there's more of you. And alternately, if you eat less and you exercise more, there's less of you. And that math is something they deal with all the time. But at Weight Watchers, they also look at the social aspect. They know that if you've got a support system, you're more likely to do the good things. The better angels of your nature will prevail. And alternately, if you hang around with people who inspire bad habits and bad behavior, bad results. So there is, I've never attended a Weight Watchers meeting, but there's a group leader, there's a cheerleader, there's a moderator, there's somebody there who's trying to help you do better. And the talk is maybe 3 minutes, maybe 17 minutes, but they say, okay, you goofed up. What are you going to do? How are you going to do it better? And they have, at the granular level, a whole bunch of things. And I've heard indirectly many of their talks, but the best single talk was pick your heart. Somebody was whimpering and complaining, it's hard to move the weight. Yeah, it is. It's hard to be morbidly obese. It's hard to be lean. It's hard to be rich. It's hard to be poor. Pick your heart. Everything is going to be hard, but at the end, what are you going to measure up? Right. And I heard that, and it registered, because you and I visit people's homes, wonderful people, obese smokers, who are not healthy. We know people who are lean and healthy, and it's hard to eat right. It's hard to be obese, but you pick your hard. Discipline is remembering who you are. You exercise discipline. When we first, I'll say, competed in a public arena, I admired you because you were the distinguished Toastmaster. You look at you. You're in the suit coat. You're in the tie. You do the right things. You do the right things routinely. You weren't born that way necessarily, but you've adopted habits that stretch you. And discipline is knowing whose you are and knowing who you are. Discipline is paying attention to what matters to you. And you and I, we're both flawed, but we're trying to be a better version of us now than we were a year ago, and we hope in a couple of years we'll be better still.
My second birth, I've had 3 births. I've given a talk on that.
Okay.
My first birth was when I was actually born.
Good.
My second birth, when I was reborn at MCRD Boot Camp San Diego, the Marine Corps, that's what this is from.
Good.
My third birth was when I was baptized in 2015.
Good for you.
So yeah, it is. Everything is hard, done properly. Why did you write the book?
Well, it's mentioned in there, my best male friend suggested we write a book together. Nice guy, we had nothing in common that we could write a book about. But I read a lot. God didn't give us children, but I read a lot. And so I thought about writing a book, and one day I came home and I said, honey, I've been invited to give some talks, I've written some articles, I think I'm ready to write a book. And she said, you want to write a get-rich-quick book?
Right.
My wife is lovely. And she didn't kind of say it that way, but I said, no, I want to write a get-rich-slowly book. And the idea of the book is people read it because they want to learn how to multiply money. That's the meat of the book. I wrote the book for a legacy. The legacy is what happens after you're gone. It was too hard to write to only be a get-rich-quick book. But I've served a couple of hundred clients, and somebody, I'm an only child, but somebody that I call my favorite sister, one of my clients, she is a class act. Her brother is a class act. I met her mom and dad. They were class act. I've met several of her siblings. And they had the landlord gene. They were good at this stuff. They cared about people. This lady grew up in City Heights. They called it East San Diego in the good old days when she was young and when I was young. And she knew every person who rented from her. And she knew their kids by name. And she exemplified face-to-face capitalism. She cared about people, and she was really interested. She called it for her a ministry. And I've represented a few rectums, a few greedy SOBs, and a lot of charming people. But the legacy was the people who, in Lincoln's words, they're appealing to the better angels of the nature. They're trying to live beyond themselves. And this lady showed that. Sandy was the one who came up with the notion of the landlord gene. And you and I have seen people who, they care about tenants and they want to create better housing. And you and I have seen people who, they can cash a rent check and they just think people are walking wallets.
Yeah.
Well, I wanted to do the legacy. I wanted to get somebody not just who wanted to make money, but who wanted to have a life worth imitating. And with passing time, I've seen some folks that that's really good, and that's a bad example. And so this was to invite and encourage and challenge people to live a life beyond what they would do on their own.
Is she the lady whose tenants showed up to her funeral? You said there were about 500 people at her funeral and tenants showed up.
This woman is still alive.
Oh, she's still alive. But there was another client in there.
That was a property manager. She served us. She worked for one of the biggest management companies in town. And she died on the dance floor on the Christmas party. That was in the old days when you could call a holiday party a Christmas party. But
literally on the dance floor?
Literally on the dance floor.
That's shocking.
And the story they tell in there is Tracy was a class act. And I've been to a few funerals. I'm not wearing a sports coat today, but where I worship, I have been a deacon and an elder, and sometimes I wear a black or a navy blue suit. And so for a while, since I had a navy blue suit, I was the guy who stood in the back when there were funerals and when there were memorials. I don't know why I was doing there. It wasn't like somebody was going to steal the sanctuary. But I ended up going to a lot of memorials for a little over a year. And so I had a notion about how it was done. And I figured that her husband would say she was a great woman and I really miss her, and her kids would say she was the best mom. And all those things I expected. What I didn't expect would there be more than 500 people show up. This was not a billionaire. This was a property manager. More than 500 people. They had a room. They had an overflow room. They had another overflow. They had TVs outside. The place was packed for a property manager. And the piece that I didn't expect was one of her tenants got up and she was sobbing and she said, "Tracy helped me when I was in deep stuff. And Tracy took a chance on me, and Tracy invested in me, and Tracy lived out legacy. Tracy was serious about her faith, and she lived it out day by day." They didn't die wealthy, but she lived a life worth imitating. And you and I know people, some of our clients, some of our competitors, some of the people related to the industry, some people will never cash a rent check. But in 100 years, we're all going to be gone. And we can each live to a higher standard. And part of the idea of the book was to invite people to reflect on it and to think about what you want your life to amount to. When you're 93, it's a little bit late to figure it out. At 47, at 27, it's easier to plan what you want people to know you for.
Is that the higher calling in this business? Is the fact that, well, I guess the legacy piece of it is, if that's, according to your book, it's serving your clients well. According to those stories, it's serving the tenants well, which are ultimately the clients.
Yeah. You and I take seriously the outrageous claims of Jesus. The people watching us may or may not think those claims make any sense. But he suggested that 2 fundamentals was love the Lord your God with all your strength, all your mind, all your heart, all your soul. Put your whole self into it. And the second is like unto it. Treat others the way you want to be treated. So you and I have seen people who, in effect, said lie to the other side, deceive your client, and that's not what we want to be remembered for. We want to treat people the way we want to be remembered, and whether they're client, whether they're tenant, whoever. Our job is, when I step on your toe, I'm supposed to forgive you and you're supposed to forgive me. When you say something that ticks me off, I'm supposed to forgive you, you're supposed to reconcile with me. We both have, it's like marriage. Marriage is the union of 2 good forgivers. You're not the perfect husband. Your wife she's a class act. She can't be perfect. She's human. My wife is far better than I deserve, but she's human. But we're called to live at a higher standard. And that plays out at work, it plays out in the RV, wherever you are, it plays out.
Yeah, I'd say that's primarily why I'm here in this office now, is when we were competitors in the past, we worked on a transaction together, and you were the listing agent of that transaction, and you just were such a class act yourself and your whole team in going through that transaction. And my clients, you made me look good in front of my clients, and from then on, I always admired your career from a distance. We talked, but I did admire the fact that you had a reputation, or that reputation that you had created. What kind of advice can you give some of us, I don't want to say younger brokers, I mean, I'm middle-aged at this point, but the brokers or the agents that are coming up in the business? You're now at the twilight, I don't want to say, you're somewhere a little bit further along than some of the rest of us are.
You really know how to make a guy feel good. Thank you. I'm going to call you Barnabas because you're such a good encourager. But when
you're a wisdom provider, and what kind of wisdom could you pass on to some of us that want to follow in that path of how to work with other competitors in the business and keep it civil?
There's treat others the way you want to be treated. That's not very complicated. When I could just barely spell apartments, there's a lady who's now retired. And frankly, for her career, I thought she was the best broker in the business, Dixie Frank Hall. Everybody doesn't agree with me, but I was thoroughly charmed by Dixie, because when I didn't know squat. I hadn't closed a single deal. I called Dixie, and Dixie treated me like I was the Prince of England. She didn't know who I was, and she treated me with courtesy and respect, and she was gracious, and it was amazing. And then I later realized she is a hotshot broker, but she didn't treat me as the young, ignorant snot. She treated me like I was a peer. I didn't deserve that because of my performance, but that's the way she handled it. Dixie's not perfect. She's really good, but she's not perfect. But she showed me how it would be done, and in a variety of ways, I've seen other people do it. When you and I were at the stage together at the apartment association, we were competitors. We were face-to-face competitors in the same room, and I thought, and we talked about who's going to go first, and you had the class to let me go first, and I thought, wow, I don't think I'd have that much class. Now, as it turned out, you were much smarter than I was, because I spoke to 7 people, and 30 minutes later, when I was finishing, there were 43 people there, and there weren't 10,000 when you got through. But you had the class to not push yourself forward. And with lots of brokers that you and I know, there'd been a small arm wrestling thing to see who came out on top. But you had enough confidence in who you were, and because of your character, you let me go first. And going first, frankly, was not as smart as going second. I get to do some fun things with the group. My presentation style is a bit different than yours, but you were presidential. You know, you were the distinguished Toastmaster. You did everything by the book. I was more the talk show host, and I had fun doing it. And I hope you got a lot of referrals out of it. I don't know whether I did or not, but you had the class to do it a very good way.
I don't remember getting much business out of that presentation, but
most of the things we do, we put in a good effort. Nothing good happens.
yeah,
It's
well,
okay.
it's all goes into the experience pool. But there's some I didn't plan that everybody was going to show up after you presented. That was not planned. But there is some scripture that says something about if you want to be first, be last.
Servant leadership. It's easy to understand. It's hard to live out.
Yeah. Speaking of well, back to the book, you discuss emotional intelligence, which I guess that kind of ties in with emotional intelligence. You tell a story in there about a client that got ahead because of emotional intelligence. Have you found that is well, in the book you say specifically it's extremely helpful, but tell us a story about emotional intelligence in your business.
Among my crackpot notions is most of us are our own worst enemy. I hate that. Part of the way I run my life is in the morning I get up and I read scripture and I read devotionals, and in effect I repent and I journal. So I have documented lots of things that some of them I did right and some of them I did wrong, but I've seen a lot of clients who were so upset about it's not fair that they figured out whether it was profitable. One of my notions is you buy the property, you don't buy the broker. You don't buy the seller, you buy the opportunity. And if they do something stupid, that's a great opportunity. And I've seen clients who, I'm going to teach them a lesson. And they lost the deal. And I've seen other people who said, I'm not going to have Thanksgiving with them, but I'm going to close the deal. And the people who could get a good result worked out well. Part of my training has been as a mediator, and in mediation they say you can have your way or you can have your say, but you can't have both. So if you give them a piece of your mind and you blow the deal, you've blown the deal. And frankly, they don't care for a piece of your mind. If their mom didn't teach them how to do these things, they're probably not going to listen to you. In our arena, you've got one millionaire dealing with another millionaire, and they're probably never going to deal with each other again. If you go to the car dealership and the car dealership does something shoddy, you can post it on social media, and millions of people will see it. Well, dozens. But if you get mad at Seller Sam doesn't care, because only buyers are going to deal with Seller Sam, and they're not going to read your social media. And you can scream and yell and jump and shout, you'll look like a jerk and you'll lose the deal. If you can bite your tongue and close the deal, you'll come out ahead. And I've seen, we had a 36th year anniversary party, and there were more than 50 people here. Maybe 350 people, there were a lot. And I made it a point that evening to go around and talk to many of the folks, particularly the heavy hitters, and say, what lesson did you learn? And a different way to ask the question is, the prices you paid, were you comfortable? Sometimes I would just point blank, did you ever miss a deal by a little bit? And looking back on it, what do you think? And essentially nobody said, I regret paying 0.5% too much. But lots of people said, I really regret not paying 0.25% enough. I was a gosh darn fool to let that thing go for this little sliver. And a lot of people said, my ego, my vanity, my pride got in the way. And it's hard enough. Plumbing leaks tenant problems. There's going to be lots of issues that are going to come up. But essentially, it's hard to get in trouble if you're a little bit too gracious. It's hard to get in trouble if you're a little bit too kind. Yeah, you get skinned. Doesn't matter. But your legacy will be, we're a generous person.
Have you found that over the years clients have lost deals because they let their ego get in the way?
Sure. Every year.
Every year. And do you continue to work with those clients? Have you? Let me ask it differently. Have you ever had a one-on-one talk with the client and let them know that that's probably why they lost the deal?
I hope I'm not that blunt.
Oh, yeah, that would be pretty blunt.
But I will occasionally say, "Boy, that looked like that was painful. Hey, how'd that work out for you?" Dr. Phil wants me to know how that's working for you. You and I goofed. Mm-hmm. You at one point said to me, "We're above that. We're not going to do that." And I was chastened by it. And there have been times when I said, "I think you could do better by doing thus and so." And sometimes iron needs to sharpen iron. Sometimes it needs to be direct. But most of us learn more from our mistakes than from our successes. When you correct somebody, it's better to do it indirectly.
Good point.
Your dog, or maybe your child, you need to be a bit more direct. But when you're dealing with adults, if you're going to help somebody do better, you want to have their best interest at heart. If you're trying to build yourself up, that's probably not going to be in the other person's best interest.
That's a good point. You mentioned in the book, amongst many, many tips, it's a really good book. There's a lot of tips in there that I wasn't surprised I would get that much data out of there. I have 3 pages of notes here. But one of the things you talk about, especially in this market, is that buyers need to be nimble and motivated.
Right.
And I've been working with a few buyers, and they weren't nimble and they weren't motivated, and they didn't buy anything.
Yeah.
They
were wannabes. They weren't buyers.
Yeah. So how do you choose the nimble and the motivated?
And when I get it right, I'll let you know. I think this is funny. He's saying nice things about the book. I now have more than 50 reviews on the book. I have 49 5 stars. I have 1 4-star. I wonder who that 4-star was. It was him.
That would be me.
Yeah. So
can I justify that?
You don't need to.
Okay.
I just thought it was nice. You're being so gracious here, and in print you had full disclosure and said 4 stars.
Well, I have maybe I have a different rating system.
Cool.
So.
You read better books than mine.
No, I wouldn't say it's reading better books, but I mean, in fairness, I gave Don Quixote 5 stars.
Good.
So that was
fiction.
Well, it was literature. Yeah. Okay, awkward moment past. I would buy a book that was 4 stars. So
Good.
My rating system's different.
Good.
Apparently. So nimble and motivated buyers. How do you sort the wheat from the chaff with nimble and motivated buyers?
Actions speak louder than words. If I was good, I would be able to tell you what numeral stands for. It's something like need, urgency. You remember numeral? Motivation.
Brief, yeah.
I'll say E is emotional intelligence. That isn't right. Resources, something in loyalty. CCIM has this. We each have a CCIM, Certified Investment Member. They have a short memory device which helps you figure out who is your ideal client. And we each use Rod Santomassimo's teaching or coaching system, and that's built on CCIM. But essentially you're looking for people who congruent, who, if they show they're motivated, if they say they're going to do something, they do it. If they promise they're going to look at a property, they look at it. They're going to write an offer, they write an offer. If they say they're going to write $2 million, they write $2 million. My hunch is that there's 1,500 millionaires chasing 250 deals. Most people are going to be disappointed. If you don't want to compete, that's fine. God loves you. Don't compete. Don't waste your time. Don't waste his time. Don't waste my time. But if you're going to compete, compete to win. Compete fairly. And when people tell me they're going to do something and they don't do it, okay, I get that. They tell me about the third or fourth time and I say, I'm confused. You said you wanted to compete. I told you it was going to be hard. You're not doing it. At least one of us is wasting our time. Am I not serving you well? What's going on? And we take no a lot. I'll make 5,000 calls this year. And most of them are never going to return our calls. Maybe I'll get paid by 20 or 30 people. My wife thinks I'm crazy to do this, but for me it's a calling. But essentially, when push comes to shove, if people trust you, they'll take your advice. If they're not sure you have your best interest, they may not take your advice and they'll miss. And they may later say, Doug, I should have trusted you. You had my best interest at heart. I was afraid you were motivated, but now I see you didn't care about the commission, you cared about me. You wanted the commission, but you cared about me. I'm working with some clients now. I've known them for almost a decade. We've done about 7 or 8 deals. They're buying the biggest property they've ever bought. I think they're getting a whale of a deal. They're not convinced, but they're making a choice, they say, because they trust me. I hope that my analysis is right. But they don't like the other broker. They don't like the seller. They felt like things were misrepresented. And all those things are irrelevant because the property has potential that they could develop. But because we've done this several times, they perceive that I've got their best interest at heart, and I'm trying to do that. But the people who don't trust you, if your doctor says take this little purple pill and you don't trust the doctor, you won't take it. And if it's a cure for cancer and it's your only hope, you're dead. You'll never know how good your doctor is. But if you don't trust your doctor or your attorney or your broker, you need to get a different broker or attorney or doctor. Because if you get the best expert and you won't do what they say, at least one of you is wasting your time.
I think one of the, in line with that, one of the areas where I feel I've really improved from being here for the last 12 months is my analysis. I've become more thorough in my analysis.
I agree. You were good before, and you're much better now.
Thank you. I've worked hard on it. And part of that also is earning my CCIM designation, which, by the way, before we even worked together, you and I met, and you recommended several years ago that I pursue that. It was one of your biggest pieces of advice.
Sure.
So thank you.
Sure.
You feel strongly about the CCIM designation in this market, especially now when there's so many brokers coming into the market because it's a quote-unquote hot market. What differentiates us with the CCIM? Why do you feel so strongly about the CCIM?
It's the toughest designation that the National Association of Realtors offer. It's a global standard. And it's not just in the United States. There's more than 30 countries. Maybe there's 40 countries now where CCIM is recognized. And maybe half the people are brokers. But there's appraisers, there's bankers, there's attorneys. There's lots of different people, asset managers, who have CCIM. CCIM is Certified Commercial Investment Member, and it is the highest standard. For many years, the CCIM instruction program was regarded as among the 10 best professional instruction programs in the nation. Teaching pilots, teaching attorneys, teaching anything, it was regarded as among the best, and all the instructors were working professionals. But it had to be relevant because guys and gals would pay what was relatively big money and be away from the office. So it had to be worthwhile. Sacrifice is giving up something good for the opportunity, not the guarantee, the opportunity for something better. And the people who were going through the CCIM program were making sacrifice, not just money, but time, to be away from something very lucrative. And it, for many years, well, now 50 years, has proven to be a good investment both for the principal and also for the agent. Because before I got my CCIM, I was an arrogant snot. I thought I could do anything. But after the CCIM, I could prescribe for problems I couldn't even diagnose before. Going through the CCIM, I made a deal with another CCIM, and I paid for the CCIM in one transaction before I finished the program. And I probably made $1 million for myself with the CCIM because I speak a couple of extra languages now. I understand from people wiser than I am some of what they've learned the hard way. And I understand some shortcuts, I understand some booby traps, I understand some things that go wrong. I'm a little bit better able to serve clients, a little bit better able to analyze, and have some tools and some resources that can solve problems that frankly were beyond me before.
That says a lot about the credential, because you come from, as I mentioned in the bio at the beginning of this video, a background that's pretty analytical. You have an MBA. You started in a banking career. So to say that the CCIM has been that value is saying a lot about it.
Yeah.
We're in a market cycle right now that's been really kind of on the top floor. Well, I wouldn't know this if I didn't have my CCIM, but market cycles generally don't last as long as this one's lasted.
Yeah, as of the day this is recorded, we're in the longest recorded recovery in the nation's history.
Which means that at some point, things may change.
I hope you and I live through several recessions. We're going to have another recession. I don't know when.
It'll happen, right?
Yeah.
Every economist says it'll happen. And everybody's fearful of it. Everybody that I'm talking to. Well,
I don't relish it, but it's going to happen. I'll get a flat tire one day. It's going to happen.
So along those lines, let's tap into your wisdom once more, and maybe you can give the brokers out there, if they're listening, including myself, some advice on how to weather the storm of a recession, because you've been through a few, you mentioned.
Yeah. If you're married, listen to your wife. Or your husband, as the case may be. It seems to me that many successful marriages and many successful partnerships, there is the salesman, there's the president, and then there's the CPA, there's the attorney, yeah, but don't you remember the last time you did that? And so if you've got a balance of the conservative and the optimistic, that's a good thing. You'll never regret putting some extra money away, but also you need to lean forward. You need to lean into it. And brokers are broke in recessions. Most people don't have enough money to buy in a recession, and that's when the best deals are had. In the last recession, I lost 20% of my competitors, and volume was down about 40%. But on the other side of the recession, there are some great deals that happen because it takes a while for people to get back into it. A lot of people I know are saying, well, I'm waiting for the recession. And having looked at more than a generation's worth of data, most peaks are higher than the previous peak. So this was last time's peak, and this is this time's peak. And most troughs are higher than last time's trough. That's not true in 40 states. But government policies in California in particular, and especially in San Diego, we've built half as much as we need. We're not building enough for folks who did not graduate from college. In 40 states, they build enough. Forgive me, you've heard this before. But the city of Houston has 1/4 the population of the state of California, and the city of Houston has built more apartments and condos than the state of California in the last decade. Apartments are cheap in Houston, rents are cheap in Houston. They build enough in Houston for the folks who didn't graduate from college. Having tenacity and having cash reserves in a recession can make the difference between those who stay and those who don't. It's not just necessarily the better brokers who last, but it's the ones who are liquid. Somebody who I deeply admire, somebody who I respect immensely, the guy who will be the executor of my estate, has, if I predecease him, the only Rhodes Scholar that I know, is invited me to talk to two people who he cares about very deeply. And I've said, in brokerage, it's not the bandwidth, it's not the character that determines what it takes. It's the willingness. Lots of people want the prize, but not everybody's willing to pay the price. And a lot of people in a recession, they don't have the capacity to last. But having some stuff squirreled away is a good thing. Eating top ramen in a recession is okay. Staying in the business is really important, but again, it's pick your hard. Lots of people say, it just costs too much. I'm not willing to do it. But if you know who you are, you'll know whether you're willing to pay the price. I made several mistakes, more than I want to talk about on film, or on video, on electrons. Anyway.
Vidcast. Yeah. We heard the term vidcast today.
Okay, that sounds good. But the short version is being prepared was good as a Boy Scout. Being prepared is good as a broker. It's good as a principal. That was a long answer. I don't think it was a good answer, but maybe...
Squirrel away cash. Listen to your wife is a great answer.
Yeah.
That can't be said enough, quite candidly. I'm learning that lesson. It's only taken me 15 years of marriage to figure it out.
42 years, and I'm still trying to get it right.
Yeah. Well, none of us are perfect, as we mentioned in the beginning. That said, at the time of this recording, AB 1482, it's working its way through the state legislature.
That's the one that's going to build more housing, right?
No, that's not the one that's going to build more housing. That's going to be the anti-housing bill. It's the rent control bill. It's passed the state assembly. It has some wings. It's moving on to the committee for the Senate in a couple weeks. The governor, as you and I have discussed, says he'll vote for a housing bill. I'm sorry, he'll sign off on a housing bill if it comes to his desk. It's going to, essentially, it's been renegotiated to put a 7% plus CPI cap on annual rents, no more than 10%, which most folks don't think is really bad. But then now, of course, they're adding things to it like the just cause eviction bill. How, after being in the market for 25 years, how do you think that's going to affect the San Diego apartment market?
I think it will hurt housing statewide for more than a generation. If it stayed as it's proposed, it might not be a bad thing. In New York City, when they recently did rent control, the number of transactions dropped by about half. That may happen in California. In Lincoln, Nebraska, in Des Moines, in Tulsa, in Charlotte, in lots of places, they can't get 10% rent increases because they build enough. And if I told you that you could only jump a mile high, that wouldn't sound very threatening because, frankly, not you can jump a mile high. But what has happened more than once, well, let's take income tax. Your grandfather may have told you that income tax was just 1%, it was just the very rich, and it was just temporary. You must be really rich because I think you're paying more than 1% income tax. It might start out at 7% plus inflation, but if things go here like they have in other places, it might become 6% or 5% or 4% or 2%. And if the government had the ability to say, well, your Home Depot bill will go up no more than, and your gas bill, and your insurance bill, and your utility bill, but no, in fact, it's just your income that will be limited, but your costs won't be limited. So in the arena that we've been in the last few years, about a third of the deals have been renovated property. The sweet little old widow owned the property 30 years, her husband up and died. Frankly, she can't keep up with it. Her rents are a third below the potential market. And maybe the balconies are faulty, maybe the roof leaks. But she sells the property, and the guy who buys it spends $20,000, $50,000 more, cleans it up, paints it up, raises the rents a whole lot, and takes substandard housing and makes it affordable. Everybody can't, or makes it desirable. San Diego has a lot of millennials. The last time I knew, we had a higher percentage of millennials in Austin or any place else. That it varies from time to time, but right now we have very appealing housing. If you take away the incentive to renovate, the widow's not going to get as much for her property. The two most common employment for rental owners are teachers and retired. So we can solve income inequality by penalizing teachers and retired by doing this. I don't think that will build more housing. I think Houston says if you build more housing, you'll cut the rent. And if this in fact happens, I think we will cut the number of people who will do renovation. Right now, you and I could name people who would buy a used building and they clean up, they paint it, and fix it up, and whether they'd spend $10,000 or $50,000, they'd do it. If you can only raise the rents 9%, well, somebody's not going to spend $50,000 a unit. Maybe they'll spend $4,000 and they'll raise it 9% this year, and then maybe next year, maybe they'll spend another $4,000, and maybe they'll raise it, and so on. And so over 5 years, maybe they'll eventually do it. I doubt it. I think those guys will go somewhere else. If we really care about our folks who can't afford to buy, we would build more. Frankly, that hurts me as a landlord. But I'm weird for a whole bunch of reasons. But there was somebody running for a state legislature, and I handed him a check, and I said, I want you to lobby to create more competition for me. And my notion was, if we build more housing, that's better for the state. And at this point, with your parents and my parents, your grandparents and my parents, when there was a crisis, we, as Americans, said, we're all in this together. We were attacked more than 50 years ago by governments that we considered oppressive, and we decided we're going to save the world for democracy. And we made immense sacrifices. That was the greatest generation, not you and me. Things have changed, and now we're in a situation where a lot of people seem to think success is, I'm the last one eaten by the sharks. If you're the last one eaten by the sharks, well, I win because I'm the last one eaten. Our grandparents and our parents said, we're going to fight off those bloody sharks. None of us are going to go down. We're going to survive. And they were committed together, and that's not the society that we've got now. I don't think the planning directors and the governors were deliberately mean, and I don't think they said, let's squish poor people. I think they said, we don't have enough parking. We ought to increase the parking standard, and that priced some people out. And these things are not as safe as they could be, and so they required more, and that priced people out. And people once upon lived in North Park, and then North Park became too expensive, and they moved to City Heights, then they moved to Alpine, and now they're in Imperial Valley or Tijuana or in Temecula. And nobody said, let's really hurt the poor people. They just said, housing ought to be nicer. Not everybody can afford a new Bentley, but lots of people can afford a used Taurus. But if we said everything has to be a new Bentley, you're going to price people out. We have 100,000 people who are living outside San Diego County and working in San Diego County. And the governor's good intention won't create more housing. The upzoning will create more housing. Changing the parking can create more housing. Penalizing the people who own rental housing won't create more housing. It will diminish the incentive to be a landlord.
And my next question would be, where does the investor that's looking to, like the millennial that's sitting with us handling the recording equipment, that wants to go down the traditional path of buy a duplex and then leap up, does that doorway close for?
It'll be different.
It'll be different?
Years ago, I visited with a doc, and I became his friend, or he became my friend, however. And when he was in between our current ages, he turned in his medical license. He said, "It's not fun anymore." So when I was a young man, doctors were like gods. They could do lots of stuff. They could make lots of money. I've had it. There's too much regulation, the insurance, the lawsuits. I'm done. And his daughter became a doctor. And she said, "I'll never be in Dad's world. I understand that it was great for him, but it's a better deal for me than my next best alternative." And so the daughter became a doc. In one sense, Dad was shocked, but it was relatively high-paying, relatively nice prestige, and so for her it was a good mix. I think California will be more expensive than many other states for a long time. One of my favorite books was Triumph of the City, and the guy who wrote the book, a Harvard professor named Glazier, claims that the city is our species' best invention. If you want to find love, it happens better in the city. If you want better jobs, it happens better in the city. Ideas meet and generate more ideas. The income is better in the cities than it is in the rural places. Almost anyway, the ecology is better in the cities. And California has a lot of cities. It's an expensive place to operate, but the more efficiency makes it a better place. I don't know what's going to happen, but I think California will continue to do well, but it seems to me that our government, maybe with the best of intention, is putting sand in the gears, and I think it will grow slower here. I think it will be more cumbersome. I don't think Al-Qaeda's biggest damage was the thousands of people who killed when the towers went down. It's that they've imposed an extra 30 minutes of travel time for decades on our nation. So when you go to the airport, you've got to spend an extra hour there. Even if you've got the TSA card, you've got to spend extra time there. And the bad news was firefighters, first responders were killed, people minding their own business when going to work were killed, but the biggest cost is the TSA. And I think that we have costs where the government is trying to solve a government cost problem with a government imposed solution that won't build more housing.
The Apartment Association says build more housing, and that's what all the economists seem to say, more supply to fix the problem, but nobody seems to be listening, unfortunately.
Isn't that crazy that the apartment owners are saying, give us more competition? Yeah. I don't know electricians who say we ought to have more electricians. I don't know bankers who say we ought to have more bankers.
Right.
But I kind of like that at the Apartment Association, is they really... You've been involved with the legislative activity, and I have too. We've each lobbied for it and given money and done fundraisers and that kind of thing. But I think a lot of landlords really are community-oriented. There are some greedy SOBs.
Right.
But there's a lot of people who really do put the community first.
I'd agree with that. Most of the owners I talk to, the independent owners, and maybe you feel the same way, are typically 20, 30, 40, 50% below the market in their rents anyways, the ones that I've seen.
A lot of people are. Sandy and I bought a property, and Flossie was one of our tenants. Flossie was over 70. Flossie was not Caucasian. Flossie had had a hard life. She was a sweet lady, and we said, we're never going to give Flossie a rent increase. And Flossie never paid rent increase. Flossie up and died. We eventually sold it. And for a while I thought, I'm pretty special. I'm a considerate guy. Well, I've since figured out that lots of people have a Flossie. It might be George, might be the handicapped guy, but lots of people. In my book, I talk about rental ownership as face-to-face capitalism. I'm not special. Lots of people are quietly compassionate. They don't make the news for that, but lots of people are quietly compassionate. Some people say, I don't want to go to the trouble, I don't want to take the risk of a vacancy. I met with a widow yesterday, and her 2 kids and her daughter-in-law were there with her, and I said, do you love your tenants more than you love your kids? And I did that deliberately because I don't know what her rents were, but my hunch were that her rents were more than 25% below the market. And she was talking about her 2 kids were both renters. And I said, if you charge fair market, you could refinance and you could give $100,000 each of the kids and they could buy a house, or you could get a life insurance policy. I'm Social Security age, and she was, ahead of me. And she's probably not going to live another 20 years. But she could buy a life insurance policy, and when eventually we all pass, she could fund the 2 kids' homes. She's made a choice, but it's not the only right choice. If she raised the rents halfway to market, and she got a small life insurance policy, that could work. There were 2 or 3 different answers, but a lot of us drift instead of making conscious choices. And there's many ethical ways to do it. Thinking is hard. Thinking well is very hard, and most of us don't do it very well. You got to pick your hard. Somebody said that's important.
Pick your hard. The book is Building Legacy Wealth. It's a fantastic read. It's from a perspective...
4 stars. 4 stars.
I'm not going to live that one down. It's from a perspective that I haven't read yet, the perspective of a successful broker. Before I ask my final question, Terry, where would you recommend folks get a signed copy or an autographed copy of your book?
Well, the only way you get an autographed copy is to come see me. You could buy it through Amazon in several different ways. But I do have a couple of boxes of books, and I do sign them for people I see face to face.
Does the book have a website or a web address?
It does, and I think it's called buildinglegacywealth.com.
Perfect. We'll put it in the links below, buildinglegacywealth.com. Final question, and I appreciate you being our first podcast interviewee.
I'm honored that you would let me do this.
Absolutely. Well, it's our honor to have you. When you finally get your fill of a long and successful career.
When Sandy is really happy.
She's fantastic. What legacy do you want to leave behind in this business?
I would hope that people would laugh and say he talked too much, but he really tried to treat people the way that he wanted to be treated. He was a jerk and he was obnoxious and all that stuff, but he really tried. His default setting was to treat people well, and sometimes he got it right. That's probably as good as I can hope for. I do think that because my clients have been successful, I'm not sure I can document this, but I think that there's 100,000 people that live in better housing because I've made the pitch to owners and say, buy the building and spend $1,000 a unit, $2,000 a unit, $10,000 a unit, clean up, paint up, fix it up. As I think about the 400 plus transactions and the number of units and the number of years, I think there's probably 100,000 people who live in better housing, not because I own that many, but because I helped buy 7 units or 27 units. And most of my clients have cleaned it up, painted it up, fixed it up, and raised the rent. And the paint eventually gets old, and the appliance eventually gets old. But depending on the improvements, you might get 5, 10, 15 years of improvements. We're not building enough housing, but if we can make it nicer, that helps. So I hope that people that I'll never see are living in better housing because my client made it better. And when they do well for their tenant, they create value and their tenants pay more. When somebody buys a new house, they don't move out of a tent. They probably move out of a rental house or a rental condo. And I think it's Fred Schnaubelt who cited a study where when you build a new house, there's 7 families who move up because each one moves into something better. They've been made vacant by the person who moved into the house, who moved into the. And I think there's been a multiplier effect because my clients have made things better for their tenants.
Very well said. Building Legacy Wealth, top San Diego apartment broker, shows how to build wealth and live a life worth imitating. Terry Moore, CCIM, thanks for coming on ROI. I appreciate it.
Pleasure to be here. Enjoy.
Thank you.